There are truths within you that were never meant to be spoken aloud, not because they are shameful, but because they are powerful. The modern world teaches us to expose everything, to narrate our lives constantly, to explain ourselves until nothing remains sacred. But the psyche does not grow through exposure alone. It grows through containment, through silence, through the careful guarding of what is still becoming. Your inner life is not a public space. It is a private terrain, fragile in its early stages, easily distorted by outside voices. When you speak certain things too early or to the wrong ears, you do not gain understanding. You lose alignment. There are 7 things in particular that should remain largely unspoken, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. First, never tell anyone your deepest goals before they are formed in reality. A goal spoken too early becomes vulnerable to the projections of others. Some will doubt it, some will envy it, some will reshape it according to their own limitations. The unconscious listens closely to reactions, and repeated doubt can quietly weaken your inner drive. What is meant to grow needs darkness first, like a seed underground. Second, never fully reveal your weaknesses to those who have not earned your trust. Vulnerability is sacred, but not everyone deserves access to it. There are people who collect weaknesses, not to understand you, but to feel superior or secure. When your inner fractures are exposed to the wrong consciousness, they are no longer healed, they are used. Third, never explain your life philosophy to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Your values are shaped by your experiences, your suffering, your insight. Not everyone has walked the same inner road. Explaining yourself endlessly drains energy and creates inner conflict. When your truth is solid, it does not require constant defense. Fourth, never speak openly about your next move. Silence before action is a form of power. When you announce your intentions, you unconsciously seek validation, and validation replaces inner authority. Let action speak. Let results introduce you. The psyche respects what is lived, not what is promised. Fifth, never tell people how much you have grown. Growth that needs recognition is still tied to ego. Real transformation is quiet. It changes how you react, how you listen, how you endure. Those who need to announce their evolution are often still negotiating with their old self. Sixth, never share every detail of your happiness. Joy exposed too widely becomes fragile. There are eyes that do not wish you well, not always out of malice, but out of unconscious comparison. Protect your peace. Let happiness be something you experience deeply, not something you display constantly. Seventh, never reveal your darkest thoughts to those who lack self-awareness. The human mind contains shadow, impulses, fears, contradictions. These are not meant for judgment, but for integration. When shared with someone who has not faced their own darkness, your honesty becomes a mirror they cannot tolerate. They will fear you instead of understanding you. Silence is not deception. Privacy is not weakness. There is a difference between isolation and inner sovereignty. When you learn what to keep within, you gain clarity, strength, and direction. The world does not need full access to your inner life. It only needs the version of you that has been shaped, grounded, and lived. What remains unspoken continues to work in silence, and silence, when chosen consciously, becomes one of the greatest forms of self-respect. Not everything within you is meant to be exposed, because exposure is not the same as truth, and silence is not the same as fear. There are parts of the human inner world that lose their power the moment they are spoken carelessly. The psyche does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds in layers, each one requiring time, protection, and inner readiness. When something is still forming inside you, it exists in a delicate state, vulnerable to distortion. Words are not neutral. Once released, they are shaped by the ears that receive them, and those ears carry their own wounds, biases, and unconscious motives. Modern life encourages constant sharing, constant explanation, constant visibility. It creates the illusion that to exist fully, one must be seen and understood by everyone, but the inner self does not grow through constant observation. Growth often requires obscurity, a private space where thoughts can evolve without interruption. Just as a seed does not break the soil immediately, inner truths require darkness before they can withstand light. Silence is not emptiness, it is incubation. When you expose something sacred too early, you invite external judgment into a space that should have remained internal. Even well-meaning opinions can disrupt the natural development of an idea, a desire, or a transformation. The unconscious listens closely to external feedback, and repeated doubt can slowly weaken conviction. What begins as a quiet inner certainty can dissolve into confusion simply because it was shared before it was strong enough to stand alone. There is also a deeper psychological mechanism at work. Speaking about an inner truth can create a false sense of completion. The mind mistakes expression for integration. You feel as though something has been lived simply because it has been verbalized. This can halt real inner work. The psyche seeks balance, and when words replace action or reflection, growth stagnates beneath the surface, while the ego believes progress has been made. Silence allows you to listen to yourself without interference. It gives space for contradictions to coexist without pressure to resolve them prematurely. Not everything needs immediate clarity. Some truths reveal their meaning only after time has passed, after experience has refined them. When you rush to explain yourself, you interrupt this natural process. You force coherence where ambiguity was necessary. There is also the matter of energy. Every inner truth carries psychological energy. When you speak it aloud, some of that energy is released outward. If the listener does not understand or resonate, that energy dissipates into nothing. But when held inward, it can be transformed into action, discipline, or insight. Silence concentrates energy, it sharpens intention, it deepens resolve. Many people fear silence because they confuse it with invisibility. They believe that if something is not acknowledged by others, it does not exist. But the most powerful changes often happen without witnesses. Inner alignment does not require applause. The psyche matures through lived experience, not external validation. When you learn to hold your inner truths without immediately sharing them, you develop inner authority. You begin to trust your own perceptions rather than constantly measuring them against others. There is also protection in silence. Not everyone has the capacity to hold another person's truth without projecting their own unresolved issues onto it. Some will misunderstand, some will minimize, some will unconsciously sabotage what they cannot embody themselves. This is not always malicious, often it is instinctive. By keeping certain parts of yourself unspoken, you prevent unnecessary psychic conflict. Silence also teaches discernment. It forces you to ask who truly deserves access to your inner world. Trust is not proven through words, but through consistent behavior. When you speak selectively, you begin to recognize the difference between those who listen to respond and those who listen to understand. Your inner life becomes less crowded, more intentional. There is a difference between authenticity and exhibition. Authenticity does not demand full exposure. It requires alignment between inner truth and outer action. You can live honestly without revealing everything. In fact, some truths become most authentic when they are lived quietly, embodied rather than explained. The mind often seeks reassurance when it speaks. It wants confirmation that its inner direction is correct, but reliance on reassurance weakens self-trust. Silence removes that dependency. It forces you to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate not knowing how others perceive you. In that discomfort, strength develops. You learn to anchor yourself internally rather than externally. Certain truths are meant to mature privately because they change over time. What you believe today may evolve tomorrow. When you declare something publicly, you bind yourself to a version of yourself that may no longer be accurate. Silence allows flexibility. It gives permission to grow without having to justify every shift to an audience. There is also dignity in restraint. When you do not reveal everything, you preserve mystery, not as a performance, but as a natural boundary. The psyche respects boundaries. They create structure. Without them, inner life becomes chaotic, fragmented, exposed to constant influence. Silence does not mean repression. What is repressed is hidden out of fear. What is held in silence is protected out of awareness. The difference lies in intention. Conscious silence is an act of self-respect. It acknowledges that some parts of you are still becoming and deserve patience rather than premature exposure. In learning what to keep unspoken, you learn to listen more deeply. You become less reactive, less eager to explain, less dependent on being understood. And in that quiet space, inner truths begin to gain weight, depth, and stability, forming an internal foundation that does not collapse when questioned, misunderstood, or ignored. Speaking too early invites outside influence into what is still forming inside you. An idea, a dream, or an inner decision in its early stage is not yet solid. It is fluid, sensitive to pressure, and easily reshaped. When you give it words before it has found its internal structure, you expose it to forces that were never part of its original intention. Every listener becomes a silent participant, consciously or unconsciously altering the direction of what you are trying to create. The moment something is spoken, it no longer belongs only to you. It enters a shared psychological space where opinions, doubts, expectations, and comparisons begin to attach themselves. Even encouragement can be dangerous when it arrives too soon, because it can shift your motivation from inner necessity to external approval. What began as a personal calling can slowly transform into a performance designed to meet others' expectations. The unconscious is highly impressionable during the early stages of intention. When someone questions your idea, even subtly, the mind does not simply dismiss it. It stores the doubt. Over time, these stored doubts accumulate and create internal resistance. You may begin to hesitate, procrastinate, or abandon the path altogether, not because the idea was flawed, but because it was weakened by premature exposure. There is also a psychological illusion created by early disclosure. When you speak about something you plan to do, the mind often experiences a sense of relief, as though progress has already been made. This satisfaction reduces the inner tension that normally drives action. The energy that should have been used to build, practice, or prepare is released through conversation. The result is stagnation disguised as expression. Ideas need friction with reality, not commentary. They grow stronger when tested through action, not when evaluated through discussion. Early opinions rarely come from people who fully understand your inner reasoning. They judge based on their own experiences, fears, and limitations. Without realizing it, you may begin to adjust your vision to fit what feels acceptable rather than what feels true. Speaking too early also creates psychological obligation. Once others know your intentions, you may feel pressured to follow through even if the inner direction has shifted. This pressure can trap you in a path that no longer aligns with your deeper self. Silence preserves flexibility. It allows evolution without guilt or explanation. There is a difference between clarity and certainty. In the beginning, you may feel clarity without certainty. You sense a direction, but you do not yet understand its full implications. This stage requires listening, observing, and refining, not defending or explaining. When you speak during this phase, you are forced to rationalize something that is still intuitive, and in doing so, you risk distorting it. Outside influence does not always arrive as opposition. Sometimes it appears as advice, guidance, or concern. These can be just as disruptive. Advice given too early can override your own problem-solving process. It can replace your inner authority with borrowed confidence. When challenges arise later, you may find yourself unprepared, having relied on others' perspectives instead of developing your own resilience. The psyche develops strength through self-generated insight. When you keep something private long enough to act on it, you build trust in your own judgment. Each step taken without external validation reinforces inner confidence. This confidence is not loud or performative. It is quiet and stable, less shaken by criticism or praise. There is also an energetic dimension to early speech. Intention carries momentum. When held internally, this momentum accumulates, creating focus and determination. When dispersed through talk, it weakens. You feel busy, involved, and expressive, yet nothing materializes. Silence channels energy inward, where it can be converted into disciplined effort. Many people confuse openness with honesty. But honesty does not require constant disclosure. It requires integrity between inner intention and outer behavior. You can be truthful while remaining silent. In fact, silence often protects honesty by preventing premature commitments and external distortions. Time is a necessary ingredient in the formation of anything meaningful. Rushing to speak often reflects impatience with the natural rhythm of growth. The mind wants reassurance, recognition, or certainty, and speech becomes a shortcut. But shortcuts in inner development often lead to fragility. What is built slowly withstands pressure. What is rushed collapses under scrutiny. By delaying speech, you allow your intentions to encounter reality first. You discover what works, what fails, what needs adjustment. This interaction with experience refines your vision far more effectively than conversation ever could. When you eventually speak, your words carry weight because they are grounded in lived understanding rather than speculation. There is also a psychological maturity that develops when you learn to keep your inner processes private. You become less reactive to others' opinions because they were never part of the formation. Your direction feels self-generated, not negotiated. This autonomy strengthens identity and reduces inner conflict. Speaking too early often comes from a desire to be seen, to be supported, or to feel less alone in uncertainty. But uncertainty is not something to escape. It is something to endure. Endurance builds psychological depth. It teaches patience, humility, and trust in the unfolding process. When you allow something to form fully inside you before exposing it to the world, you give it a chance to become resilient. It develops roots instead of remaining a fragile outline. And once something has roots, outside influence loses its power to uproot it, reshape it, or quietly dissolve it before it has had the chance to exist at all. Privacy is a form of inner power, not secrecy born of fear. And understanding this distinction changes the way you relate to yourself and to others. Fear-driven secrecy contracts the psyche. It hides, suppresses, and fragments inner life. Conscious privacy, on the other hand, organizes the inner world. It creates boundaries that allow thoughts, emotions, and intentions to develop without constant intrusion. Power does not always announce itself. Often it is quiet, grounded, and self-contained. When you lack privacy, your inner life becomes porous. Other people's opinions pass through you too easily, shaping your self-image before you have had time to form it yourself. You begin to live reactively, adjusting your inner compass according to external feedback. Privacy interrupts this pattern. It gives you space to hear your own voice clearly, without distortion, without interruption, without the need to defend or explain. Many people equate privacy with dishonesty, as though not revealing everything means you are hiding something shameful. This belief is rooted in insecurity, not truth. A psychologically mature individual understands that not all parts of the self are meant for public consumption. Some experiences are formative, Some are symbolic, some are still unresolved. Exposing them prematurely does not lead to clarity, it often leads to confusion. Inner power grows when you are not constantly narrating your inner state. Narration turns experience into performance. You begin to experience life through the lens of how it will be perceived rather than how it is being lived. Privacy restores immediacy. It allows you to feel fully without translating those feelings into words for others. This deepens emotional intelligence and strengthens self-awareness. There is also a stabilizing effect to privacy. When you do not depend on others to validate your inner experiences, you become less emotionally volatile. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not shatter you. Your sense of self becomes internally anchored rather than externally maintained. This is not detachment from others, but attachment to your own center. Privacy protects the process of becoming. Identity is not static. It is constantly evolving. When you expose every shift, doubt, or insight, you freeze yourself into explanations. You feel compelled to remain consistent with what you have already revealed, even when growth demands change. Privacy allows contradiction. It allows experimentation. It allows you to outgrow versions of yourself without public negotiation. There is strength in choosing who has access to you. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They ensure that only those capable of understanding and respecting your inner world are allowed close to it. Without boundaries, intimacy loses meaning. When everyone knows everything, nothing feels significant. Privacy restores depth to connection by making access intentional rather than automatic. Psychological power also lies in containment. To contain an emotion, a thought, or an experience means you can hold it without being overwhelmed by it. Privacy supports containment. When you immediately externalize inner tension, you avoid the discomfort of holding it. But it is in that discomfort that integration happens. The psyche learns balance by enduring internal pressure without collapse. There is a difference between expression and compulsion. Healthy expression is chosen, compulsion is driven by anxiety. Oversharing often stems from a need for reassurance, absolution, or connection. While these needs are human, relying on constant disclosure to meet them weakens inner stability. Privacy teaches you to meet some of these needs internally through reflection, discipline, and self-trust. Inner power is also related to mystery. Not artificial mystery designed to impress, but natural mystery that arises when a person is not fully predictable or transparent. This mystery exists because the individual is still exploring themselves. They are not finished, they are not fixed. Privacy preserves this openness. It allows you to remain in dialogue with yourself rather than becoming a completed story told to others. When you maintain privacy, you also reduce unnecessary conflict. Many disagreements arise not because of fundamental differences, but because too much personal information is shared with people who cannot hold it responsibly. Misinterpretation, projection, and judgment thrive on excess information. Privacy minimizes these distortions by limiting exposure. There is also an ethical dimension to privacy. Your inner experiences are shaped by relationships, memories, and moments that involve others. Sharing everything can unintentionally violate the boundaries of people who are part of your story. Privacy honors complexity. It recognizes that not every truth needs to be spoken to be respected. Inner power does not seek constant confirmation. It trusts its own continuity. When you know who you are becoming, you do not need to explain every step. Silence becomes a sign of confidence, not avoidance. You move forward without announcing, adjust without justifying, and change without apology. Privacy also deepens presence. When you are not thinking about how to describe your life, you are more available to live it. Attention returns to the moment rather than the narrative. This presence strengthens perception and intuition. You notice subtleties you would otherwise miss. Fear-based secrecy creates tension because it is rooted in shame. Conscious privacy creates calm because it is rooted in choice. The body responds differently to each. One tightens, the other settles. Over time, the psyche learns to associate privacy with safety rather than threat. When you reclaim privacy as a deliberate practice, you stop leaking energy, you conserve it. This conserved energy can then be directed toward growth, creativity, and transformation. You are no longer scattered across multiple explanations of yourself. You are centered. In this way, privacy becomes a quiet form of authority. You are not withholding out of mistrust, but out of respect for the inner processes that require time and solitude. What is truly yours does not need to be constantly shared to remain real. It becomes stronger the longer it is held with awareness, patience, and intention. True growth is revealed through actions and presence, not explanations or validation, because transformation does not announce itself in advance, nor does it seek witnesses. When inner change is real, it quietly alters the way you move through the world. Your reactions soften or sharpen, your priorities rearrange themselves, and your attention shifts without the need for commentary. Growth that depends on explanation is still negotiating with the ego, still asking to be recognized as progress. The mind often wants proof that it is changing. It looks for acknowledgement, agreement, or admiration. This desire is understandable, but it ties development to external response. When growth requires applause, it becomes performative. Actions, however, do not ask to be believed. They simply occur, and in occurring, they reveal what words cannot. Presence is one of the clearest indicators of inner change. A person who has grown is more attentive, less reactive, more capable of holding tension without immediate discharge. This quality cannot be faked through explanation. You either embody it or you do not. Presence arises from integration, from having faced inner conflict rather than having talked about it. Explanations often serve as substitutes for responsibility. When you explain too much, you dilute accountability. You focus on being understood rather than on being aligned. Action removes this ambiguity. What you do defines you more accurately than how well you describe yourself. Growth expresses itself through consistency, not articulation. There is also a temporal aspect to true growth. It unfolds over time and reveals itself gradually. Sudden declarations of change are often reactions to discomfort rather than evidence of transformation. Real growth withstands boredom, pressure, and repetition. It continues when no one is watching. This endurance is visible only through behavior. Validation can feel motivating, but it is unstable. It fluctuates according to others' moods, values, and insecurities. When growth relies on validation, it becomes fragile. A single criticism can undo months of effort. Action grounded in inner conviction does not collapse under disapproval. It adapts, adjusts, and continues. Presence also alters how you listen. Instead of preparing responses, you absorb what is being said. Instead of defending your position, you observe it. This shift cannot be explained into existence. It emerges from sustained inner work. Others may notice it before you do, not because you told them, but because your way of being has changed. There is a paradox in growth. The more you experience it, the less you feel the need to talk about it. Language becomes insufficient. Words feel shallow compared to lived experience. Silence begins to feel more accurate than description. This is not arrogance or withdrawal, it is alignment. Explanations often arise from insecurity. They are attempts to control perception. You want others to see you in a particular way, to acknowledge your effort, to confirm your progress, but perception is never fully controllable. Presence relinquishes this need. It allows others to perceive what they will while you remain anchored in your own experience. True growth also reshapes boundaries. You stop overextending, overcommitting, over-explaining. You recognize where your energy belongs and where it is wasted. These decisions show up in action long before they are verbalized. You say no more clearly, not necessarily more loudly. You choose differently without announcing the change. There is also humility in action-based growth. It accepts that transformation is never complete. You are always in process. When you explain yourself as someone who has grown, you create a fixed identity. When you act with awareness, you remain open. Presence allows for continued learning without the pressure to maintain an image. Validation seeks agreement. Growth seeks truth. These paths often diverge. Truth may isolate you temporarily. It may not be admired. Action guided by truth can look unimpressive from the outside, but over time, it builds coherence. Your inner values and outer behavior begin to match. This coherence is felt by others, even if it is not named. Presence also changes how you handle conflict. Instead of reacting defensively, you respond intentionally. Instead of escalating, you de-escalate. This restraint is a sign of strength, not weakness. It emerges from having faced your own impulses rather than having justified them. When growth is real, you do not need to convince anyone of it. The need to convince signals doubt. Action eliminates this need. You become less concerned with narratives about yourself and more committed to living in accordance with your inner direction. There is also a quiet confidence that comes with embodied growth. It is not assertive or loud. It does not dominate conversation. It simply exists. Others may feel calmer around you or more unsettled, depending on their own inner state. This effect is not intentional. It is a byproduct of presence. True growth simplifies. It reduces internal noise. You spend less time explaining and more time observing, less time justifying and more time choosing. This simplicity is reflected in behavior. You move with clarity even when the path is difficult. In this way, growth becomes visible without being advertised. It leaves traces in how you treat others, how you treat yourself, and how you remain steady in uncertainty. Action and presence become the language through which inner change speaks, quietly, consistently, and without the need for permission or recognition.